than any time in the history of Pakistan. Iqbal Institute's role became much more critical at a time in Pakistan's history when the extremist Islamic discourse has crossed even the upper limits of the threshold of sanity, where the Islamist and the traditional Islamist discourse has become intellectually infertile and politically irrelevant, and when the so-called liberal secular discourse has become culturally rootless, philosophically shallow, politically naive, and essentially intellectually obsessed with an archaic and superficial notions of Western modernity. It's a pity that in Pakistan one cannot name a single liberal secular intellectual who can be said to have engaged in a sustained and intelligent intellectual discourse from within the Islamic tradition. And it is in this context that one remembers with a great deal of nostalgia people like Fazl Rahman and Iqbal Ahmed. But of course, one also celebrates today the rare voices of moderation, intellectual dynamism, and creativity that individuals like our Dr. Manzoor Ahmed and Dr. Khalid Masood consistently demonstrate in their writings and public discourses on Islam. Dr. Manzoor Ahmed has left several landmark legacies when he was the rector of the International Islamic University in Islamabad and when he was the chairman of the governing council of the Iqbal Institute. But none is greater, in my view, than his bringing the Iqbal Institute from Lahore to the International Islamic University in Islamabad. He did great things at the Iqbal Institute, besides, of course, appointing me as the executive director, which is understood. He redefined the mission statement and objectives of the IRD, Iqbal Institute, to liberate Islam from the extremist discourse and to interrogate both the Islamic orthodoxy and Western modernity. He gave us clear guidelines as how to realize our objectives and goals and what specific tasks and programs we should undertake in order to realize our goals. It was during his leadership that we held 3 international conferences, dozens of seminars, conferences, and panel discussions, and invited several scholars and diplomats of international repute to the Iqbal Institute from the United States, United Kingdom, South Africa, Germany, Lebanon, Malaysia, India, and Bangladesh. We hosted public lectures by Prime Minister Tony Blair, Secretary Jack Straw, Secretary David Miliband, Tariq Ramadan, and many other Muslim public intellectuals like Farid Ishaq, Ibrahim Musa, Babi Sayyid, and Asad Abu Khalil. His contribution to the Iqbal Institute's intellectual efforts is evident from the fact that he personally attended every single international conference, panel discussion, and seminar and public lectures that were held at the Iqbal Institute in Islamabad, despite his commitments in Karachi and despite his health conditions. He provided generously both moral and financial support to make our program success. Thank you very much, Dr. Manzoor Saab, for your all work and your contribution and for your support. We pray for your good health and we count on your continued support of the Iqbal Institute. Let me begin with a few general remarks about the theme that we selected for the seminar on cartoon, Ghaza cartoon, Facebook, law, religion, and global politics. My first observation, as most of you will agree, is that freedom is not a license. When we talk about freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, we do not talk about a general license. Freedom involves responsibility on the part of those who exercise this freedom. The critical question is, what are the limits of free speech? Obviously, as most of us will agree, there must be protection of the right of others. Not just protection from slander and libel, but also protection from incitement to hate and violence. Both the Nazi Holocaust and the genocide in Rwanda in recent history remind us that the large-scale persecution of minorities and ethnic cleansing and genocide, they always begin with the innocent idea of the freedom of speech. First slandering the minority, then ascribing some kind of a collective guilt to that minority, and finally declaring them as an enemy that must be destroyed. Both the Nuremberg trials after the World War II and the Rwandan genocide trials that took place in Hague, therefore, it's very interesting to observe, therefore, they put to death life sentences and death sentences not only to the criminals and the perpetrators of violence, but also the artists and the journalists and the radio broadcasters and the intellectuals who were deemed complicit in the genocide by their hateful writings and by their hateful speech. We learned from these examples how power can instrumentalize the notion of free speech to frame a minority and offer it for target killing. To understand why international courts committed to defending the speech, free speech, can hold artists and writers and broadcasters and cartoonists responsible for crimes against humanity, we need to distinguish between two concepts: bigotry and blasphemy. Blasphemy is a practice of questioning tradition from within. In contrast, bigotry is an assault on that tradition from outside. If blasphemy is an attempt to speak truth to the power, bigotry is an attempt by power to dehumanize the powerless and prepare ground for their eventual extinction. A defining and, in my view, not very welcome feature of the cartoon debate in the Muslim world in general and in Pakistan in particular is that bigotry is being mistaken for blasphemy, which misses the whole point of power relations that exist in the world today. As I indicated earlier, free speech integrally involves the idea of social responsibility. It also involves limits of the free speech. And it also involves the idea that if you pursue one right, for example, freedom